Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Daryl Guberman. I'm the CEO of Guberman PMC LLC, a quality consulting firm here in Connecticut. I've helped companies in manufacturing and quality and special processes and also ISO certification in all derivatives. My experience, my background is 40 plus years in aerospace, medical implants, medical materials, printing, and plastic distribution, where we dealt with every industry under the sun. We're going to go right to the chase now because November 15, 2022, Chris Wray, the chief or the director of the FBI, gave a deposition, I guess, to the Congress or Senate or both. And he said that TikTok, the video deal out of China, Beijing no less, TikTok is a national security concern. Yet his organization was watched over and controlled by Communist China from 2015 to 2021. And we're going to show you that. And remember this, business owners. Thomas Paine said it, and I will tell you. When speaking the truth, it is many times like administering medication to the dead. Christopher Wray at every deposition says how bad China is. It's a detriment to the United States, while his organization was being watched over by Communist China, and I will prove in this video, so watch it. It may be 20 minutes long, might be 30. But this has taken time to metastasize over years, if not decades. So we bring this to you. And Christopher Wray, this title of the video is FBI Chief Chris Wray says TikTok is a national security concern while China laughed between 2015 and 2021. Here's Mr. Christopher Wray. Chris, thank you very much for coming up to visit us in Connecticut. We appreciate it. Thank you so much. I know you see behind us the mission statement of ANSI, which your organization, your agency sits on and was sitting there between 2015 and 2021. When a communist Chinese national, Zhao Jinwu, who's been involved with our quality since 1994, took control of the International Accreditation Forum, where ANSI and ANAB, the American National Crediting Board, and ANSI, by the way, ANSI took over complete control over ANAB in 2018, but nevertheless, your organization, your agency, and many other federal agencies sat on ANSI while they were being controlled by Communist China. And if you forgot, Christopher, that China has the National Intelligence Law, Article number 7, which mandates espionage. So while you harmoniously sat on ANSI between 2015 and 21, the Chinese was taking your data, and we have that information. Every federal agency, Chris, that sits on ANSI's board, it's a conduit for espionage, without a doubt. Here are some of the thoughts. FBI Director Chris Wray's thoughts on China and China's thoughts on Chris Wray. Chris Wray, FBI, says the whole of the Chinese society is a threat to the U.S. and the Americans must step up to defend themselves. FBI Chris Wray says Chinese espionage poses the most severe threat to American security. He also said, Christopher Wray, director, making his mark as loud and insistent China critic. China determined to steal up economy ladder of U.S. expense, FBI Chief Christopher Wray says, and that's because of ANSI. Absolutely. I have the proof. Head of America's principal federal law enforcement agency calls intelligent threat posed by China broader and more severe than that of any other country. And here he is. This is what China thinks of Wray, Christopher Wray. Vulgar, arrogant, mentally challenged, a lowlife. Asked Chinese state media for an assessment of the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation's director, Christopher Wray, and that's the response. That's less flattering. People like Wray emanate the kind of vulgarity shown by history's career lowlifes. The vulgarity floods the U.S. administration today. Well, at that time, Chris Wray was saying it. He was being controlled and watched over by Communist China. We will show you. Christopher Wray's organization sits on ANSI. In fact, back a couple years ago, because they sat on ANSI, ANSI gave him a free ride certificate. And this, is, I think, is for a laboratory certification. But that's neither here nor there. We're going to show you some stuff. Very good stuff. ANSI always talks about impartial oversight. Well, impartial oversight. Can we really say that? And I'm going to tell you just a real quick thing, Chris, because I have to, because this all meshes together. And this video, as I said, may be long. This June, I put in a 55 or 54-page document to ANSI. I wrote them because I saw that they had a nomination for Director at Large. I wrote them. Eleni Konstantopoulos, who works at ANSI, sent me back a package. In that package, you had a Joe Batia, the CEO, sending me a congratulatory letter saying thank you for, thanking for applying to the, Director at Large position. And on that letter, there was a click link for their code of conduct and other items of what you have to do as going into that membership or on the board as to represent ANSI in the best light. We had 9 questions to answer on what we can do to bring some goodness to ANSI, what it is the benefit. Well, Chris, as I saw on ANSI's board, they got federal agencies, they got corporations, but they don't have any representation of the small mom and pop shops, the 5, 10, 15, 100 people. They don't have any good representation. I wanted to be a conduit for, the small mom and pop shops to get into ANSI and to be able to talk and be a representative to the big OEMs. I've dealt with OEMs out in the private sector when I worked for other companies. So I felt that was a benefit. Also, I wanted to change their mission statement. Their mission statement is "Have a nut, fuck you," and I'm going to show you why and what happened and what took place for a chairman I still don't know why he called me and left this voicemail, but hold on one second. I just wanted to get my little device so that I could play this recording for you. So what happened is, Russ Cheney called me in 2019, left that voicemail. After I got done answering these questions, to the best of my ability, being able to be that conduit for the small mom and pop shop into ANSI, I thought it was a great idea. I received, at the bottom of the questions, it said this: "The committee appreciates your interest in serving in an ANSI leadership position and your willingness to provide us this additional information. Sincerely, Russ Cheney, ANSI 2022 Nominating Committee Chairman." And you know what the worst thing is? Do you think, Chris, honestly, you've been in the FBI a long time, human nature has it that this guy isn't going to pick me? 3 years later, they still hold a grudge. Because you know what? You'll see why. Impartial oversight, we thought they were going to have it. We thought they were going to, in 2019, Chris, let me bring you up. In 2019, Chris, all I asked ANSI to do after Russ Cheney left me that vulgar voicemail is I asked for an apology. Wouldn't any human being ask? Any sane human being return and say, "Yes, I'm sorry, Daryl"? But no, they denied it. We're going to continue on. One of the words that they use in quality that they really don't want you to know, and in voluntary consensus standards, is called obfuscation. I don't know if you've ever heard that before, Chris, but it's a commonality word, obfuscation. The action of making something obscure, unclear, and unintelligible. In 2013, Chris, I gave a speech at the American Society for Quality. There was a Dave Levy, a Region 3 Deputy Director of the ASQ. In 2013, the ASQ, the American Society for Quality, and ANSI, the American National Standards Institute, owned ANAB, the American National Credit Board, 50-50. I was in the business of getting certification to the smaller mom and pop shops who couldn't afford the large ANAB accredited organizations. First off, they couldn't get in touch with anybody at many of these registrars. They were put into voicemail, and 2 to 3 days later, these companies got called back rather than instantaneous. I have built my business on the factor that you can contact me Monday through Sunday, 24/7. And if I don't pick up the phone, I will contact you within the hour. I do my best to do that, and I have done it. That's why I'm around going on almost 12 years now. So this is what Dave Levy said. Dave Levy said, "There is no restriction on you doing business unaccredited or accredited, and we are accredited. And as I said before, ANAB has no problem with what you're doing. In fact, we support you, sir. So that was 50%. We support you, sir, 50%. Any sane man would say, yes, he's giving you, the approval. In 2016, just 3 years later, Randy Doherty in 2014, we'll show you that shortly, I think. In 2014, Randy was the vice president of ANAB, the chairman of the IF Incorporated in Delaware, that's the International Accreditation Form, and also he was the principal on the tax form 990. Now in 2016, when he invited us to either join the IF or ANAB or both, which we refused, we'll tell you why shortly, he was a technical advisor, and he also sat as the treasurer on the IAF and also the principal on the IF tax form 990. As you can see, he then, in the same letter, he said this to us. He said, but we recognize and accept, you hear that, Chris? But we recognize and accept that there are conformity assessment bodies and accreditation bodies, such as your body and your accreditation body, that are not part of the IF and ILAC structure. While my colleagues and I at ANAB can attest to the confidence in the integrity and competence of the registrars accredited by IF member accreditation bodies, we cannot attest this for your body. Well, let me give you a for instance. You have Boeing, who sits on ANSI, right over by the FAA, right over by the DOT, right over by the FBI, etc. The FAA seceded inspection to Boeing concerning the 737 MAX, which meant, Chris, that they could design it, develop it, build it, and fly it, and get the FAA and, I guess, flight worthiness. They also have quality issues on the Boeing 777 and 787. They also sit on ANAB's two boards. One of the boards that Boeing sits on can grant, suspend, and withdraw certification at this time in 2013, 14, 15, etc. So you have that. Confidence in the integrity of quality, that Randy says. Disgusting. You have Pfizer and Johnson Johnson, both sitting on ANSI's board. They're sitting right over by the FDA, USDA, CDC, NIH, and also, again, FBI, DOD, and DOJ. They skipped quality processes and standards, okay? It's disgusting. And they pushed the COVID vaccine. From what we've discovered, Pfizer had a 15 million recall of that COVID vaccine, and I think Johnson Johnson had a 60 million recall. You have automotive companies having failures all the time. And it is electronics as well. And all of them are accredited under the ANSI ANAB half a nut fuck you mantra. So we're going to continue on. We discovered, Chris, and it's even on a government contract, that ANAB is an underwriter for the International Accreditation Form and also ILAC, the International Laboratory Accreditation Cooperation. The IF, of course, incorporated in Delaware. This is what an underwriter is, Chris. I'm sure you know what that is, being involved with the FBI. An underwriter is any party that evaluates and assumes another party's risk for a fee. ANSI, the American National Standards Institute, where the FBI sits, Chris, they are a private, not-for-profit, non-governmental corporation that has federal agencies and corporations on board. Here we go, Chris. In 2015, and by the way, you can see that the FBI is right, second one down, and this is only a sample of corporations, federal agencies, but let's get back to this. Randy Doherty in 2015 was the vice president of ANAB, the chairman of the IAF, and also the principal on the IF tax form, incorporated in Delaware International Accreditation Form. He handed over leadership to Zhao Jinwu, a communist Chinese national who's been involved with our quality since 1994. In fact, we have a letter that, an article that Randy praised the factor that Zhao Jinwu's been involved with our quality since 1994. I'll show it to you briefly, but we have it. If you want to call me, 203-556-1493, or Daryl, TQRS, at yahoo.com. He was handed over the IF Incorporated in Delaware, the International Accreditation Form. He is also the chief executive of the China National Accreditation Services that certified the suspect lab in Wuhan, China, that released the COVID virus. And you'll find out from a deposition from Pamela Sale, and she's coming up very shortly, because your FBI lab is quite involved in a sense of failure. What happened is, is that Pamela Sales said from one laboratory to another, there's variances. There's very little protocol. There's no system in place that from one laboratory to another, you'll hear that. You have the factor that Zhao Jinwu was mandated by the communist government to take your data through the China National Intelligence Law, Article number 7. You have ANSI and ANAP. ANSI took over complete control over ANAP in 2018. Another thing is this, Chris, if I may. Randy Doherty in 2017 was being advertised in the Department of Homeland Security. Okay, a private concern being advertised on a governmental agency, ANAP. He was then told, or actually given the title, his old title, the Vice President of the American National Crediting Board. So we go even further. There's a Phil Masterson who sits on ANSI, okay, and he gets, I think, $256,000. At that time, it was called a royalty payment. A royalty payment, from what I gathered, is a non-taxable payment. Because I exposed the factor, they took Randy off the DHS, and they put, rather than royalty payment on their 990 not-for-profit tax form, they called it various. What the hell is various? But anyway, you go back to Randy, okay, DHS. Don't you find something very peculiar that Randy, an American on the Department of Homeland Security that sits on ANSI's board, ANSI and ANAP, I'm going to show you very shortly, sat on the IF during the time that Zhao Jinwu was the chairman of the American Incorporated Company in Delaware. Okay, he's mandated by his country of origin, China, to take our data, or any data, through the China National Intelligence Law, Article number 7. You find anything wrong with that? In fact, I say this emphatically again, Chris, is that every one of the federal agencies, even yours, their data has been taken. But as a fellow quality professional that I have known for 50 years, he said, Daryl, by them sitting on, by any of the federal agencies sitting on ANSI's board, or corporations indeed, it's not hacking, it's giving our data away. And you have federal agencies, corporations. This is the letter, or a little tiny blurb, that Randy gave complimenting Zhao Jinwu for being involved with the quality of us since 1994. You also have the factor sitting on the IF, Chris. Sitting on the IF is Iran and Pakistan. Randy goes into detail in a letter when he was the vice president of ANAB and the chairman of the IF, and on the tax form as well as principal. He said that an IAF MLA is equivalent in accreditation to ANAB, which means when Boeing has on their supplier portal, the third-party registrar must be accredited by ANSI, ANAP, or an internationally equivalent. Since Iran and Pakistan are internationally equivalents, IAF MLAs, they could in essence go into Boeing, Lockheed, or any American company. That's basically what Randy said. I don't care what they're going to say back. On top of it, sitting on the IF at this time was Lockheed Martin as an associate member that could vote on policy, and also ANSI and ANAP are sitting there. I focus in on that because Lockheed Martin in 2009 got their data taken for the F-35, okay, by China. In 2012, a division of United Technologies Sikorsky Aircraft got their data taken by China. In 2015, Lockheed Martin goes to purchase Sikorsky Aircraft for $9 billion. And in the Connecticut Mirror, it stated, with China's okay, Lockheed Martin closes in on the purchase of Sikorsky aircraft. Look it up, Chris. It's a fact. And the worst thing is you have 4 representatives of Connecticut, Congress, Senator, etc. Rosa DeLauro, Jim Himes, Christopher Murphy, and also Richard Blumenthal all state in one sentence, basically, Connecticut lawmakers praise Lockheed Martin for working with an international regulator. Our number 1 military contractor, Chris, had to get an approval from a communist country that you state under deposition is a threat to our country. I got to tell you something. There's a term in Yiddish. We call that a schmuck. That's what it is, Chris. On top of it, Lockheed Martin sits over by Iran and Pakistan, and I do not say this about the people. I say this about the politicians, just like here. But anyway, I say it about the politicians, okay? Pakistan, who harbored Osama bin Laden that killed 3,000 people, he was the mastermind. They both, Pakistan and Iran, said that they assisted with assisting the terrorists of 9/11, both of them, both countries. And Lockheed Martin sits there as an associate member that can vote on policy. Our number one military contractor sitting by countries who killed Americans. Isn't that nice? As I'll show you, ANAB sits on ANSI's board, right over by your organization, right over by, the FBI, right over by the DOT, the corporations like, Lockheed and Boeing and Pfizer and Johnson Johnson, etc. You also have 10 different registrars in China, no less, that can issue, an ANAB accredited certification. Don't you think that's a little bit like cybersecurity intrusion? Chris, you talk about it all the time. I just read it. And here you go, Chris. Here is where you come in, because your organization sat when ANSI and ANAB both were sitting on the IAF, being controlled and manipulated by China. Okay. Yes, Chris. Don't you guys work? Well, I'll tell you something. The guy when I was picketing in front of ANSI in Washington, this tall guy, I knew he was FBI. In fact, the woman who came over to me, I think also had to be, because they stick out like a sore thumb. Listen, it's a 21st century. The guy is not supposed to be dressed up with like a greaser of the 1950s with a little vest on. He was too young to wear that sweater vest, Chris. That's number one. And the woman who came up to me was too into what I was doing. Anyway, Chris, we're going to continue on. So ANSI, that FBI sat on, was being controlled and manipulated by China during 2015, 2021. In fact, it can go back all the way to 1994 if you really want to push the issue. We're going to continue on because you have to see this, Chris. You have Zhao Jinwu in China. At the time in 2017, Zhao Jinwu was the the chairman of the International Accreditation Forum Incorporated in Delaware. He was also the China National Accreditation Services in Beijing, China, and he was handing, as a representative of the CNAS, China National Accreditation Services, he was handing a ISO 17025 certification into the laboratory. There's a lot of articles about him handing it. I have the data. We're going to come up pretty soon to that. And what happened is this. Pamela Sale, and I'll get to her very shortly, the vice president of accreditation of laboratories, said from one laboratory to another is a variance. Variances. So for those people who are saying that the virus escaped from the lab, it's very true. And since the China National Accreditation Services is equivalent in accreditation to ANAB, then the liability of the virus and the sickness and the deaths coming out of the lab is all on, the onus is on ANSI and ANAB because they are underwriters for the IAF and ILAC. Several months ago, another federal agency gave a deposition. Anthony Fauci was being inquisitioned by Senator Rand Paul. And my feeling is, Chris, because your platform is always the same. You talk about the detriment of China, Yet when Chris Wray talks about TikTok and his organization was controlled and manipulated by China since from 2015 to 2021, I think you have to get rid of that script and succumb to the fact that you have to say, yes, Daryl Guberman is telling the truth. We have been controlled and manipulated by China because it's true. Every one of those federal agencies on ANSI have had their data taken. Department of Homeland Security, FBI, DOD, DOJ, all of them, FTC, CDC, NIH. So Rand Paul asked Anthony Fauci about gain-of-function research. Rand Paul, NIH, and by the way, the NIH, CDC, sit on ANSI's board over by the FDA, USDA, FBI, FAA, DOT, DOJ, etc., And also Pfizer and Johnson Johnson sit on there too. Quality is out of control because there is no quality under voluntary consensus standards. All it is half a nut, fuck you. And it's true. And I'm going to show you. So, in a China technical magazine, when Fauci said, I don't know, well, we took a look and we investigated this a couple years ago. And here it is, Chris. Upcoming events, second China-U.S. workshop on challenges of emerging infections, laboratory safety, and global health security. between May 17th and 19th, 2017 in Wuhan, China, and the very first topic is gain-of-function research, okay? 2017, about 2 years before COVID escaped. That's disgusting. It really is. You have a guy from Harvard, by the way, a guy, Charles Lieber, that the FBI arrested once the COVID came to the shores of America. He was the chairman of the chemistry department at Harvard University, but Harvard kept quiet. Oh, we don't know what he does. Why? Because China's giving them a substantial amount of money for donations, and I guess the president of Harvard kept his mouth shut. Charles Lieber is very good at what he does. He got awards from the IEEE and also NIH. Both of them sit on ANSI's board. And for his nanotechnology, both biological and electronic. Yes, Chris, I hope the FBI took a look into this, but the way you are, every time you give a deposition, oh, China's bad for us. You remind me, Chris, I hate to say this. No, I don't. I don't hate to say it. You remind me of those claymation cartoons of Davy and Goliath the dog. And when you're asked questions, oh, China is not good, George. Davy, why is China invading us? That's exactly what you sound like when I listen to you on TV, because you use the same script. So I had some customers, 2017-18, that wanted me to assist them in getting ISO 17025 for laboratory. So I delved into it because I've never dealt with it. I've dealt with ISO 9001. I've dealt with AS 9100. I've dealt with ISO 1345 and some other ones like cybersecurity ones, ISO IEC 27001, 27013, and other derivatives of the ISO standards. And this is what I came up with when I was looking. A majority of failures happen in accredited labs. In fact, one of the articles in this one says the FBI evidence lab is a cesspool. We looked further and further, and we found that here's an article about the FBI forensics lab, okay, that sits on ANSI, by the way. The reason why I guess he said have a nut fuck you is because I exposed the factor of impropriety. You have ASCLD lab on ANSI's board that is presently owned, at the time it was only owned by ANAP, but at present it's owned by ANAP and ANSI because ANSI took over complete control over ANAP. Also sitting on that board is A2LA, which does a lot of these forensic laboratories, especially government and all the rest. You also have ANAP itself as a standalone accreditation/registration body that does laboratory. And this came out of a newspaper, or actually a news article in 2015. The major evidence, this is ANAP suspends all DNA testing at a DC crime lab, the DFS, which is the Department of Forensic Science, which is run by you guys, Chris. And here it goes. The major evidence that calls into question the competence of ANAP is the 18 months and more during which quality auditors in ANAP and internal auditors of the DFS, Department of Forensic Science, missed non-compliances of such magnitude as to warrant suspension of the accreditation, Chris. In fact, we have a signed sheet which goes back a while for ANAP provides FBI QAS audits. ANAP offers FBI QAS DNA audits. ANAP is recognized by the National Institute of Justice. The National Institute of Justice is a research development evaluation agency of the United States Justice as a provider of a QAS audits and has a formal recognition agreement with FBI regarding the use of FBI's director's audit documents and the provision of training the DNA assessors. I guess it wasn't that good because this is now in 2016, that's 2015, but I don't think it's improved any after you read what Pamela Sales says. And by the way, this, ladies and gentlemen, is the actual document that we have signed from the FBI, and you have Keith Greenaway, a representative of ANSI ANAP, who, Keith, at one time, he still is, once I checked, he still is the COO or CEO of ANAP. and his father, Skip Greenaway, is the CEO of Eagle Registrars. Impropriety? Well, the next one is this. This is the one that Pamela Sales had to answer. Austin Crime Lab failure points to a national crisis. This is from September 2017. As disturbing as these revelations are, the Austin lab is not alone. Similar scandals have occurred in labs in major cities across the country, including neighboring Houston, as well as St. Paul, Detroit, New York, and Philadelphia. In 2015, the FBI lab in Washington, D.C., your lab, Chris, admitted that nearly every examiner in elite FBI forensic unit gave flawed testimony in almost all trials in which they offered evidence over a period of 20 years, according to the Washington Post. Those trials included 32 death sentences, and you can see that looks like their training failed too. Unbelievable. Marvin Schechter, a lawyer in New York, wrote an article about ASCLD Lab in 2011, Chris. In fact, ASCLD Lab could more properly be described as a product service organization which sells for a fee, a seal of approval. Yes, it's terrible. Now we bring out the woman of the hour. We have Miss Pamela Sales, the Vice President of ANAB and ASCLD Laboratory Certification. And this is what she says. This is why it is quite plausible, feasible, and probable that that virus was released from the lab in Wuhan, China, the Bio Level 4 lab, Christopher Wray. One of the issues is that there is no commonly agreed upon set of standards that forensic labs around the country have to follow. Instead, there are informal guidelines that labs can choose to follow or not. So there is no protocol, Chris. So what I did is I exposed the factor about A2LA. A2LA, yes, A2LA. I exposed the factor, and what happened was, let me grab this. What happened was this. A2LA sits on ANSI's board, and you could see that plain as day. At the time, they were also sitting on the IAF, and they were, of course, China was in control, and Zhao Jinwu had the China National Intelligence Article number 7, means that he can do espionage. And Ashley Morton from A2LA wrote underneath the video that we did, and she said, A2LA does not sit on ANSI. They are both American accreditation bodies with equal standing. Now, Chris, I didn't know who this guy was when he called me that night and left me this message. I had no clue who he was. I still have no clue of why he even called me and left that. But I think because a guy like you, your agency is on there, I think he thought that he was made out of Teflon. Not anymore, because I'm proving to you, Chris, that you have and you were watched over by China at least between 2015 and 2021. So I'm going to play this for you, but before I play it, I did some research after the voicemail we received, and we discovered that Russ Cheney is a chairman. A chairman has certain code of conduct along with the people who are members that they must follow. Well, let me ask you, if you said this, what would happen?
Return your call as soon as possible. Record you.
Chris, he did say half the nut fuck you. So what this means in essence, Chris, is that since your agency sits on ANSI's board, along with other federal agencies and corporations, and their board of directors, okay, and their members, it's like they all said half a nut, fuck you to me, and all I asked is for an apology. We're going to go into that. We sent out, we didn't know at the time until we read it and we submitted our document this year, 2022, for Director at Large. But at the time, when you sent a email in of complaint, it would go to Joe Bathia, the CEO. The CEO then would discuss it with the chairman. I didn't know it at that time in 2019. But what he did was he sent out the note, okay, and the recording to their lawyer, Jameson Carroll of Carroll and Weiss in Atlanta, Georgia. All I wanted was an apology. That's the least they could do. This guy, I didn't even know. And I'm going to play this recording again, Chris, and then I'm going to read to you what the lawyer said.
Russ Cheney, please
Yes, Christopher Wray. He did say, have a nut, fuck you. But do you know what his lawyer said? The lawyer of ANSI? Analysis. After analysis, we were unable to identify any harassing or objectionable content in the brief audio file provided. Did you hear what he said, Chris? So, in 2022, I applied for a position at Director of Large. I thought I could benefit them. And I could. I could still benefit them. All I wanted was an apology. Now, you know what I want? I'll tell you this. I went to New York, to their branch in New York, ANSI's branch, and there's no signage outside. So we made this sign for ANSI. ANSI says, have a nut, fuck you, because at least it comes from Russ Cheney. He's the chairman. Maybe subliminally, he's saying that about their quality, that they dispense their certificates, because there is no quality. As I mentioned with Boeing, Lockheed Martin had problems, and they still have problems with quality. Boeing has problems with quality. It's just unbelievable. And Pfizer, Johnson Johnson. I then went down to Washington, D.C., where I saw one of your people. I'm almost positive it was FBI, and the woman, too, who came up to me. You got to dress them up better. You know, I never dress up, fancy schmancy out on the streets of anywhere. I also contacted the Washington PD before I went down there and got the proper paperwork signed, but because I was one man going down there, Officer Goss, I guess, didn't think that was, a red light should go on, because I'm a business owner. I care about our country. And no matter how much you say, Chris Wray, no matter how much you say under deposition that China is a threat to all of us, whether it's TikTok or anything else, by you sitting on ANSI, it makes you just as culpable as you inviting China in and taking information from the FBI. And then on top of it, from Russ Cheney being the chairman saying, have a nut, fuck you, on audio tape, like you've heard, that's like you saying, have a nut, fuck you to me. And I find that very offensive, Christopher Wray. I find all the speeches that you give to Congress or Senate when you talk about China to be bullshit. Absolutely atrocious. And business owners and my fellow citizens, you've seen in this video that the FBI was watched over by China from 2015 to 2021. And I'm telling you, these federal agencies need to get off ANSI. But you know something? I don't know if we're too far gone yet, but I will stand here and I will say this to you, Mr. Wray. And this is a poem from Thomas Paine, from me to you. It is impossible to comprehend the moral mischief, if I may so express it, that mental lying has produced in our society. When a man or woman has so far corrupted and prostituted the chastity of their mind as to subscribe their professional beliefs to things they do not believe, Chris, they have prepared themselves a commission for every other crime. I leave it here, ladies and gentlemen, because I'm a proud American. By the way, I didn't join ANSI in 2016 or ANAB because of IAF and it's being controlled by communist China. I'm a proud American. Those businesses who are ANAB accredited, you have to think twice, and I really mean that. Many of them will say, Daryl, we have to keep our balls in the air. Well, if they had their balls in their pants, maybe they'd be on video, like me. Talk to you soon. Telephone number 203-556-1493 or Daryl, TQRS, @yahoo.com. I thank you. And Chris, thank you again for coming in.